All right, today I'm going to talk to you about empowering neurodivergent employees in the workplace and being effective leaders. So thank you for joining. I heard some great things out of the event, so hopefully some people have some good things to take away from it, and hopefully I'll be able to contribute some more. Quick background, I'm Joe Riddle. I run a nonprofit consultancy that partners with employers to design and implement neuroinclusion strategies. We've been around for a long time, for about 10 years. We got our start back in 2013, so I guess it's 11 years. But we've worked with a number of different companies, mostly large enterprises, in designing and implementing and supporting their neuroinclusion strategies. So today I want to go through, based on all that experience that we've had, I want to go through some of what we're talking about here through this agenda that I've got here. We'll talk about some key terms, some of the business case, and neurodiversity in action, and then we'll also end with some practical tips for neuroinclusion for teams. So I always like to level the playing field, and if you've been in this event, you've probably heard a lot of this terminology, so I'll kind of breeze through it here. But I always like to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So first, what is neurodiversity? We refer to it as natural variations in the brain that result in different ways of thinking, learning, communicating, socializing, experiencing the world, right? We all have different ways of thinking, learning, socializing, experiencing the world. You might have heard, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? These are all kind of things that help us see that we all think and learn and socialize a little bit differently. But yet, when we look and further break down this term, we also want to talk about what's called a neurotype. A neurotype just helps us to define a set of characteristics within a brain. We also see the idea of neurodivergence. So this refers to neurotypes that diverge from what is societally understood as normal. So things like ADHD, autism, Tourette's syndrome, dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc. These would all be considered neurotypes that are within the idea of neurodivergence. We can also further define that neurodivergent is a term to describe an individual or a neurotype that is outside of that societally understood norm. So this would be the opposite of neurotypical. Now, all that being said, understanding some of these neurotypes. We like to see that in this wheel of neurodivergence, there's a lot of different things that exist there. And neuroinclusive workplaces exist where cultures support and value that neurodivergence. And to value it, you have to kind of understand it. So looking at the different areas, so when we look at things like autism and ADHD, definitely part of neurodivergence, but oftentimes they start to overlap. And because we have a tendency to think of these things as siloed neurotypes, that you are this and you are this. But what we're learning more and more is that you can be many different things. The point is that there's this neurotypical and neurodivergent kind of two different definitions here that we want to highlight. Now, another really common thing, this is more common in autism specifically. There's some great research that highlights the idea of what's called spiky skill profiles. And we see in the darker gray line, highlighted in purple in the middle of this graph here. This is a standard IQ test or an example of an IQ test. What we tend to see is that for most neurotypical people, they will score across different categories of an IQ test around that 100 mark. And it'll be kind of a more straight line. However, with a spiky skill profile, common with neurodivergent neurotypes, we see these peaks and troughs start to emerge, where people have some pronounced strengths, but then also areas of challenge. And what we want to help is to help leaders, especially in the workplace, fill in the gaps of those challenges to take advantage of those strengths. And we can do that with some really simple methods that we'll get into in a minute. So how do we put this all into action? Well, first, understanding that this is a movement that we're going through. The neurodiversity movement supports the idea that neurological differences among people should be recognized and respected, and it calls society to adapt in order to more effectively meet the needs associated with neurodivergence. So we want to make sure that our environments are starting to change, as opposed to putting the pressure on the individuals in the room who are neurodivergent to make that change. That's not what we're looking to do. We're trying to get the society and environment to change around that person. And you may be familiar with the idea of a medical model versus a social model. Now, I like to point out that when we talk about medical models and we talk about specific neurotypes, sometimes we talk about disability. Disability and neurodivergence don't necessarily need to be the same thing, but many people consider them overlapping. So in this, when we talk about disability, we're often talking about sometimes a diagnosis. And this medical model of disability focuses on a diagnosis. It focuses on the symptoms and limitations that those symptoms create. And that's a really helpful thing when we're looking at an individual patient. But on a social level, on a societal level, on a workplace level, it's not really that helpful. One, we don't have access to people's medical records, and we shouldn't. And also, it prioritizes this treatment and this cure that we can't even begin to understand what we need to do in this social model in the workplace. So instead of looking at the social model, we want to look at the barriers that any person is experiencing as a result of their environment, that we want to change the society and not the individual. And we can see this in many different ways. If we look at someone who has difficult in mobility with their legs, for example, and we look at an environment that they're operating in, if there's a lot of stairs that they're present around them, that environment is failing that person. That person is not the failure that we need to try and cure and solve. And so we really want to focus this, and the same thing can be applied when we look in the workplace, when we look at how we interact with each other in our jobs. The social model of changing this environment is what we're trying to aim for with this idea of neuroinclusion. So another really helpful thing that I like to bring up, and again, we're still kind of leveling the playing field here, is that we find that things like functioning labels, things like high functioning or low functioning or mild or severe autism can create a lot of misconceptions. So instead, we are recommending that support needs language is a much more helpful alternative. So for example, this person has a high need for consistency, or this person is a non-speaker and one of her support needs is to have an AAC device charged and available at all times. This is much more helpful than what would previously be a blanket statement of this person has severe autism or is low functioning. These are really big generalizations. And if you think back to our spiky skill profile that we mentioned, it doesn't quite communicate all the way what we're trying to get to. Now, how do we take all of that information, those definitions surrounding neuroinclusion, and turn them into a neuroinclusive support system? Well, there's a couple of different examples here. And I like to look at, within the workplace, 3 different categories or 3 different buckets. On the far right, we have neuroinclusive best practices. Now, this is an easy thing to implement. This is just general things that we should all be striving to do all the time. In the middle, we have workplace adjustments. These are things that we want to change about that workplace environment. And on the left, we have this formal accommodations. Now, when we look at formal accommodations, so often, this is the process that we think of when we think about disability and the workplace. We think we have to go to HR, we have to submit a file and a report and upload documents, make sure we have proof of a disability to get a formal accommodation. And that's true. The Americans with Disability Act make sure that we have that available to us in the US, and there are many similar laws around the world. Those are really helpful things, and we want to make sure that people take advantage of them. And examples here are, expensive equipment purchases, although I do like to point out that most accommodations are less than $500 or free. Or it could be things like a flexible schedule if it's available to people. However, we want to challenge people to not just think of those formal accommodations. We also want to look at things like workplace adjustments. These are things that don't really require any paperwork. They don't need any enforcement. Really simple things like written instructions and expectations. Or if you're having trouble with sensory processing differences, noise canceling headphones, allowing people to use things like that can be really, really easy, very simple way to create a workplace adjustment in the moment. And then the easiest one, neuroinclusive best practices. These are just kind of good business hygiene. Things like making sure that you're having neuroinclusive events. You're not blaring music and creating a sensory nightmare for some people. Or you're making sure that your communications are neuroinclusive by offering them in different modalities. All of these things can be great best practices to make sure that we're allowing people to have access to their environment and appreciate the environment that they're working in. Now, we always get asked, we provide support to hundreds of people in the workplace. And we're always asked, what are some commonly requested accommodations? We see that written expectation, task lists, or meeting agendas in advance is by far and away one of the most common requested accommodations, or workplace adjustment, whether you categorize it in which category. And what this does is it helps anyone to kind of, one, understand what's expected of them. Big difference if you're going into a meeting or a call and you know exactly what's going to take place, or at least a vague idea of it, your anxiety is going to go much further down. It's going to be much lower. And we perform a lot better, unless it's like a track and field event. We perform a lot better when we don't have that constant anxiety to be weighing us down. So we want to be able to provide that for people, especially when we look at things like autism and ADHD, making sure that we have those task lists, those written expectations, to know if that person's performing, or helping yourselves as individual know if you're performing in the right way. So it can be really helpful. It can be a really helpful way to make sure that people are working within their environments well, and within the meetings that they're invited to. Another thing that's really commonly requested is a low noise, low traffic cool down space. A lot of organizations invest in really expensive sensory rooms, and those can be really helpful for a lot of people. But an even easier solution is, very often now in any office, there's an empty office that you can hotel or you can reserve, or a conference room. Encouraging people to use that when there's just too much sensory processing going on can be really, really helpful. And then lastly, a system for task prioritization is the next most commonly requested accommodation that we've seen. And again, this comes from information from well over 50 enterprise organizations that we've worked with, and the employees within those companies who are working towards neuroinclusion, whether it's programmatically or themselves. We see a system for task prioritization. When you look at prioritizing something, this is a social construct. This is a thing that is often not communicated well, by picking up subtle cues as to what is most important to the person I'm reporting to or delivering this item to. So we want to make sure that we can deliver that to people. So one of the things I like to encourage people to do is to take a moment to realize your ideal environment. I know for me, I do my best work in the afternoon. From 3 to 5 p.m., I can get the most work done. I think it's because I kind of like tire myself out with some emails and I have less energy. And so I can create some deliverables. I can create some materials or answer the more difficult emails. But other people might have a reverse of that. Or I know for me, I like to have kind of complete silence when I'm doing something, or like instrumental music. Other people I know and we've supported can like watch a full movie while they're doing a different task and listen to music with words, which I can never fathom. And this is something that is always fascinating to me, that we all have different ways of operating within our environment. So take a moment to kind of realize your ideal work environment, and I would encourage you to write it down so that you know if anything comes to mind. So next, I'm going to talk about some practical tips for neuroinclusion. So our top tips here, kind of similar to what we're talking about, the most commonly requested accommodations, but we'll talk about neuroinclusive communication, hidden curriculum, sensory supportive workplaces, and recognizing and embracing an individual's work style. So that first one, neuroinclusive communication. This is the biggest challenge that we see, both for neurotypical and neurodivergent people alike, right? But using straightforward, literal, specific language, saying exactly what you mean can be really helpful. Saves a lot of time and a lot of anxiety, especially when we look at social practices within a workplace. We also find that offering multiple modes of communication, so auditory, written, visual, etc., can be really helpful. So if you absorb information best in one modality of information, you're going to have that available to you. I know for me, if I'm reading a book, I like to have the physical copy of the book in my hands. I like to be able to turn the pages. But other people really prefer an audiobook. They can absorb it much better. Or other people want to watch the movie, right? Different kinds of modes of communication, and that's okay. We want to be able to provide that. And the same thing applies to our working environment. Being able to say, here's a memo on the topic. We're also having a meeting where we're reviewing it. And here's some other graphical representation of this topic that we can make sure that you understand so that we're delivering it effectively. The same thing goes with written instructions and recaps. Can be really helpful to make sure that people are following up written instructions with something that was verbally delivered. If you're not an auditory processor and your manager is giving you a bunch of information verbally, that's not going to be a great setup for success, right? And the same thing goes for people leaders, to make sure that we can, when we're delivering information, to provide those multiple modalities. Now, oftentimes we see, especially in corporate America or in the workplace in general, we see kind of these vague terminologies come to play in the form of, or in the guise of, professionalism. So please send me a report on that, people might request. But instead, what's really helpful is to actually break it down and say specifically what you're expecting. And so you could say something like, please send me a report on this. I'd like to see a short summary, the data, some recommendations. Please keep it to 1 page. What we've found, and what I've seen so many times from managers in the workplace, is that oftentimes they have a set expectation, but they're only asking for the deliverable and not defining what that expectation is. And so when a person comes with something that is, yes, technically meets the requirement, but isn't exactly what that person wanted, that is not exactly what they can use, this kind of resentment starts to build from any human to another human. And that resentment builds and that frustration builds. And the manager starts to think this person's not performing. But what's actually happening is manager is not adequately communicating what's expected in their instructions. So if you're a people leader, I would challenge you to kind of think through when you're giving out instructions or listing the tasks and priorities that you need to happen on your team. Make sure you can kind of be more specific as to what you're expecting. It can go a long way. So another thing, looking for differences in style with neuroinclusive communication. Things like cadence and tone can be different for neurodivergent individuals. We also see that nonverbal cues and body language can be difficult to interpret, especially now in a virtual environment. That's even harder when people are interacting virtually, but making sure that we're accepting of those differences can be really helpful and beneficial. Now, the next topic I'd like to cover is what we call hidden curriculum. So this describes a company's culture and style, and it's often left unsaid. Employees are usually left to pick up on this without direct explanation. So examples can be really simple. Things like, has anyone ever told you how you're supposed to notify the team of your lunch break or the arrival and departure process that you go through? If you're running late, you're stuck in traffic, does your boss want you to text them and say, hey, gonna be late, it's gonna arrive past 9 a.m., or does it not matter? Is it more flexible of an environment? Another thing for like taking the day off. Do you just message someone and say, hey, I'm taking the day off? Or is it a formal process that you have to go through? These are often never explicitly communicated, and they cause a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. But it can also go a little bit deeper than that. And first, before I show how it goes deeper, we'll look at some things that we can do to combat that hidden curriculum and to demystify it. The onboarding process is a great time to do it. We're encouraging a lot of companies to create what we call a culture book to kind of outline, here's how we operate. On Fridays in the summer, we don't maybe schedule a meeting at 4 p.m. or after 2 p.m. even. It's just generally frowned upon. Or whenever we're sending emails, we use the formal letter structure of dear so-and-so, body of email, thank you, or salutation and signed name. Or do we just use it as an instant message and just send kind of partial sentences across? These hidden curriculum items add up, and frustration and disagreement adds up over time if you don't communicate them. So we encourage people to really think about those things. And we've found that it really helps boost people's morale, productivity, because things are better understood, and also it limits the amount of frustration that comes through from new employees, especially neurodivergent employees. Now, an example here of how hidden curriculum can go much further. If we look at a standard org chart, we've got on here a president, and underneath of the president in this org chart is a CEO and a CFO. And in this made-up scenario here, the hidden curriculum of the president is that they have some values surrounding punctuality and scheduling. They're the person who's trying to make sure that the trains are running on time, sees the whole organization. They want that everything to be exact and precise. They're less concerned with creativity and flexibility. But where we start to see, especially within cultures in an organization, start to come undone or send mixed signals, we see the CEO in this fictional scenario values the opposite. She's trying to go and access more companies and get more business built for their organization, and so values the creativity and the flexibility and is less concerned with scheduling and punctuality. Now, all of the people underneath these two senior leaders are going to have mixed messages because there's going to be a mixture in terms of just basic values of what's important and how they operate. You want to take the time to really define those, and define it as a team, define it as an organization can save a lot of time and frustration. And when we think and learn and socialize and experience the world differently, again, our definition of neurodiversity, we start to see that taking the time to define these things so that we're thinking along the same lines can be really, really beneficial. And it's not just beneficial for internal operations within the company. If 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodivergent, it's also beneficial for customers as well. And so we like to see businesses try to understand this, try to implement a general, more understanding of what's expected in their workplace. So in your next team meeting, spend 10 to 15 minutes on what the hidden curriculum items of your workplace are. Again, it's what is never explicitly communicated, what's never really said, but is generally expected. It could be things like, hey, in our busy season, you're not really allowed to take a day off, even though technically you're allowed to, but you're not allowed to, right? There's a lot of these things that oftentimes people who struggle with differences in communication style can struggle to pick up on. If we explain this and explicitly communicate the rules that we're expecting people to follow, everyone's a little bit happier. So our next tip here is creating a sensory supportive workplace environment. We all have different ways of processing senses. We could have sensory overwhelm or sensory seeking behaviors that we exhibit. I know for me, I like a lot of light. I want that kind of absorption of light. But other people might want a much darker room to operate in. So making sure that we're understanding that people have different preferences when it comes to a sensory environment. And there's easy things you can do for that. Things like easily adjustable lighting and temperatures, noise canceling headphones or noise machines can be really helpful to make a environment feel much better for the people who are inhabiting it. Also in a virtual workplace, making sure that you set the culture and demystify the hidden curriculum surrounding what's expected on video calls. Make sure you explicitly communicate, hey, it's okay to be on video call for, or off of a video call for this meeting, or hey, maybe we all do want to be on a video call for that meeting or that conversation with XYZ. Really helpful to be really explicit in those kinds of things. And then embracing an individual's work style. I encouraged you earlier to think about how you work best. It's really helpful to understand that we all have different ways of thinking, learning, socializing, experiencing the world. And we want to make sure that we're being mindful of individuals' preferences, communication style, work environment, collaboration methods, etc. We want to make sure that we understand them. And so trying to go beyond just yourself and what your ideal style is, asking what other people's style are. When you're beginning a project, when you're working together, ask what your style of work looks like. Are you the person that gets everything done really far in advance and then has time to kind of like review everything, or do you work best with a deadline? I know for me, I like to go up until the last minute. Working off of that deadline makes me motivated, makes me creative, makes me excited about the project. But it might drive someone else who isn't like that a little crazy, right? So making sure you understand what each person's individual work style are and communicating out about it can be really, really beneficial. So again, optimal day structure, how people like to receive feedback, how you best learn new tasks, desired level of social engagement. Do you want me to message you every time we make a development in this project, or should we reserve the conversation for a set meeting date and time. These things can be really helpful to communicate explicitly with people. And when you're doing that, especially if you're a people leader, looking through the onboarding process, creating some documentation, and then following up with regular check-ins can be a really good, just general good business hygiene operation to do. Like, how are you enjoying the workplace? But more than that, how are you enjoying it? Or how are you doing? A lot of people will ask to simply, without going any further, be more specific. How are you liking this workflow? Do the meetings at those times work for you? Is there anything we can do to rearrange how your work style could best fit your own personal style of learning and thinking and operating? So again, a recap of all of these items. Striving to make communications as clear and concrete as possible, really helpful. Demystifying your organization's hidden curriculum. Getting to know everyone's work style preferences. These are all really good neuroinclusive best practices. And then also engage in the ongoing conversation surrounding neurodiversity. There's a lot of communication about it, but add your idea to it. Add your 2 cents to what neuroinclusive means. Because what we want to do is create this social movement towards changing the environments that we operate in, changing how we behave and think and learn and socialize within the workplace, so that when we're aiming for a more inclusive workplace, we know what we're expecting. So anyway, thank you for listening. I hope that you can continue to amplify the message surrounding support for the neurodivergent community and to lead by example for a more neuroinclusive environment, which is what we're aiming for. So thank you so much. I'm open to any questions that anybody might have, if there are any questions. All right. Well, anyway, thank you again. I'm Joe Riddle from Neurodiversity in the Workplace. Our website is nitw.org. If you would, we have some get in touch information there. So feel free to reach out with any questions or comments. We'd love to talk to you. We help companies to create more neuroinclusive spaces and processes and hiring and support. So anyway, thank you all. Really appreciate it. And thanks for listening.